Hello, everybody. Welcome to Project Terrapin. I'm at the Mate School in Manahawkin. We're preparing our hatchlings for the release tomorrow, which is June 23rd. We'll be recording that and then playing it back tomorrow at 3 o'clock p.m. We're hoping to have it posted by that time. So if you're watching it, then I hope you will enjoy that release. I'm going to introduce you to some of the turtles we're releasing today. And with that, what we're going to do to prepare these turtles for release. I want to give a shout out to the schools involved in the release. That includes Rumson Fairhaven High School. I'm going to show you their hatchlings that they're now yearlings. Once we keep them for a period of time and they reach that first year of growth, we put them into the next phase called yearlings. Also, we've had Brackman Middle School, Central Regional High School. They have an environmental club and they raised theirs as well. We also have Lacey Middle School that has raised them. Pinelands Middle School has raised these turtles. And St. Joseph's University, they're going to bring theirs tomorrow actually during the release. And we'll get into some of the individuals that we're marking right now. So one of the things we want to do with these yearlings is to mark them. We also are checking on their sizes before they go. This way we can get a good estimation of where they are and then how well they do. Hopefully we encounter them in the future. In some places like Long Beach Township, for example, there was a adult, she was a female that was nesting first time in Southern LBI. And Michelle Budd of the Terrapin Nesting Project and also works with Project Terrapin, she reported that it had 2 codes and traced it back to our population at North Sedge Island dating back to 2007. So we marked it as a hatchling then, and it grew and made its way down to become a nesting female adult on LBI. So without any further ado, let's introduce you to these Terrapin hatchlings. First, I'm gonna show you where we're keeping them stored temporarily in these bins. These are some hatchlings from Central Regional. Also, we have some hatchlings here. I'll pull these out. And since these populations are going to be going back and kind of mixing in the same environment, they're going to be going back. And these have been raised after a year. So it's kind of neat because they'll go from basically the size of a quarter, maybe even a nickel, to this size. And one of the things that we want to do is give them what they call an individual marking or notch. So they have these plates. This is the top shell called the carapace. This is the bottom shell called the plastron, and it's joined by this section over here called the bridge. We look at the marginal, the outside scutes, and each one of these has a different letter of the alphabet, almost starting like clockwise. So you go from here all the way across, and on your view, it's basically this way. And we're going to notch this individual. And all of our releases, we call them our yearlings, our head start releases this year, will start with the notch code O and end with X. We only put 2 notches on these. So here's, looking down here, you have, from your point of view, you have L, M, and O. And I'm going to go ahead and file. Sometimes when you get the camera or your videotape, especially on Zoom, you're getting this kind of mirror image. So it kind of throws you off if you're looking at it. So they're going to get notched. I'll hold them over here. And they get this little V that's cut. Now, the outer margin is made of like keratin. So it's the same, it's almost like clipping or trimming your fingernails, the same type of material. So there's not blood vessels that extend out too far. So this area is devoid of blood vessels. And it has some growth, and we put a little V in there, and that V section in there kind of gives it its own unique identifier. So if I point it this way, you have a little V that's in here. And I'm going to put one up here. X is by its head, so I'm going to do the X as well. They don't like that as much, but we'll just file that little in there, that little V in there. So it has 2 V cuts into these margins. So as it grows, and these are done okay, it'll be fine. Now, does that impede them or hurt them in any way? No. We've been notching terrapins in the Barnegat Bay system, adults and even yearlings, for a number of years, dating back to 2002, and it kind of gives them this unique code so that we could tell that we've crossed them before. And then the bigger ones, this size is a little bit smaller on the size, but something like this size, we have to notch this one as well. This will actually also get a little microchip or pit tag inserted, because these have grown to pretty decent size. Here's LMNO, so here's O, and this one's going to get OX as well. So everything released this year is going to get that same code of the OX. So I will notch this one as well. Try to keep it as steady as possible. Sort of like, this is a great little manicure for me. They're going to give me my own code. This is going to be great. The reason why we don't do individual codes for yearlings is because we're releasing so many, and we do have a certain amount of notch codes, and they're endless. I mean, you could keep adding another margin on. In fact, for our adult population, we're up to 7 margins. And once again, that could be like A, B, C, H, I, J, K, you know, and all the way around. We started out with 3 codes for our adults back in 2002. And right now we're at 7 codes for Barnegat Bay turtles, or terrapins. So that's the name for these. Once again, diamondback terrapins, because they have these beautiful diamond patterns on their back shell. They're the only turtle species in the entire Western Hemisphere to live exclusively in an estuary, which is a mixture of salt and fresh water. No other species is endemic, meaning that they spend their entire life cycle in that system. Some come out and visit, like a snapping turtle. I've seen them out in salt water, but they don't function as well. They need to go up into fresh water, and they nest in areas that are adjacent to fresh water, whereas these turtles need to have that mixture of salt and fresh. They go out in the ocean, a little too salty. They spend too much time out in high salinities. It's a little bit stressful on them because they have to balance water within their body systems. But if they are in fresh water, they tend to do okay. But the problem is fresh water is more conducive for bacteria and fungus. There's a lot of different types, or a greater variety of bacteria and fungus that can kind of live in fresh water than it can in salt water. So they've adapted to kind of take advantage of that mixture. So we'll continue to notch these, but every one of those is released. Now I want to give a shout out, because I mentioned before that these were raised by Rumson Fairhaven High School. They have a Project Terrapin embedded in there under the direction of Michael Howout, who's also conducting research. So he's doing work with terrapins up in the Monmouth County area, more specifically on the Navesink River. And he's looking for nesting areas, and he's also doing some work with their genetics. So Michael and his students that are part of this initiative are working with the community. Now with COVID and these measures in terms of social distancing, it's a little bit more difficult this summer, but Michael's been working with some residents that have been reporting terrapins nesting in certain areas up in the Navesink region. We don't know anything or really too much about that population. So Mike Howout, once again, with his students and Rumson Fairhaven High School, are answering some questions. And he does an amazing job head starting these terrapins. We give him some of our smaller hatchlings that we have an issue or problem with trying to get them to grow. And Michael has a magic recipe. So if you ever need advice in terms of how to head start, if you're sanctioned, in other words, schools that are doing this are sanctioned through the state or an entity like us, Project Terrapin, working to secure a permit to then have those schools kind of work with them. So that's the key to this too. It's not, it's not legal to take a hatchling or even a small terrapin, bring it in, try to raise it and release it. In fact, we have a window of a year, which is acceptable to the state. Once they're in captivity for over a year, there's a lot more issues with that. Are these turtles able to adjust to the wild? Can they be housing, or greater chance of them housing bacteria, fungus, or other things that could spread to wild populations? They get illnesses much like we do, and they could be carriers as well. And we know in the current situation what that means. So for us, we want to get them within that window, within that year period of time, and get these yearlings now, beyond hatchlings, yearlings, back into the wild. So that's one thing. But once again, it's with a recognized, approved type process. And there's some of our partners, shout out down to the Wetlands Institute, that has been working with this type of program for years to try to get some information on their population, and if these head started turtles are getting back, to nesting as adults, especially if they're females. If they're males, well, that's a different issue. They're going to probably hang around the marsh systems, and the way to get those are with some active measures of collecting them, whether it's using like certain traps that are humane water kind of traps so that they're not pinning the turtles underneath the water to drown. So they use things like spike nets and hoop traps, and keep the nets, above the highest watermark possible, so the turtles can be safely secured there. And then we could learn what the population's like in certain creeks and see if we can capture the juveniles, males, and even some of these head started individuals somewhere along their lifespan. If they're females, they're going to come back up on land to nest when they become reproductive, but that could take 7 or more years, according to some of the literature and some of our observations. We've had individuals that we aged at 6 years that have grown fast, and it may have been that they were head started, so they had a little bit of advantage in growth. But some of this work on head starting has really been advanced down in Maryland, and the leading terrapin researcher, Willem Rosenberg, in terms of work in years and publications, Willem's been working a lot with nesting terrapins and been conducting head start program for a while. He has some good information about the head starting, and if it's something that is helping the population, maybe hurting the population. But overall, it's just a really good message in terms of stewardship. And it just seems that terrapins that are head started, there's no real disadvantage overall. Now, if you keep them beyond the recommended time, well, that's a whole other issue. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to release them within that year window. But as far as them being able to handle a winter, they usually are able to do that. So once again, you get that instinctive ability to kind of kicks in. But beyond that, them able to get food, able to handle resources out in the wild, that basically kind of kicks in, and you wonder if they're held for longer periods of time. Like some people keep them, collect them, sometimes legal, but many times not legal. If you're keeping them over a long period of time, it's definitely not recommended that you put them back into the wild, because there will be some kind of reduced capacity for them to be successful. And then also there's a good chance that they might be carrying certain diseases that may affect the whole population. So that was the, once again, the Rumson Fairhaven bats. That's over there. We have our bats over here. Oh, here we go. I got to do a shout out to Jennifer Haynes and her group over at Central Regional High School and the Environmental Club. Here's her terrapins. She raised these. We only had a few, but maybe 5 to give each school this year because we had a lower recovery rate last fall. And we tend to want to make sure that if they hatch in a reasonable amount of time within the season, which means that if the female comes up and digs a nest this time of year, it's about a 60 to 90 day incubation period. So if they are hatched out in the summer months, even into early to mid-September, we want to make sure they go back out on their own in the wild. We don't want to collect those. We will mark those as wild release hatchlings. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that we do that. If they now go beyond that and we're starting to get into the fall, we have shorter daylight periods, it gets colder at night, it's going to be harder for these hatchlings to get acclimated to the environment. We will head start those. And once again, these are from North Sedge Island, the ones that I'm showing you, and our release is going to be in that Sedge Island Marine Conservation Zone. We do not want to take terrapins from a whole different area and kind of introduce them into another. Even in Barnegat Bay, we're doing work down in the southern part of the bay, south of the Manahawkin Bridge, down in Cedar Run, but we don't want to mix those populations because we're talking about resources, but more specifically, we have these smaller, like kind of meta populations that are kind of functioning, and we just want to make sure we're maintaining that. And that's one of the reasons why this release is focusing on the Sedge Island turtles. We will have a release sometime in the summer, probably a little bit later, further along, for some Cedar Run turtles that we've had recovered from last year. They need a little bit more time to grow before we're comfortable releasing them. And that should be sometime maybe late July, early August to give them some time to acclimate. Another thing, I'll show you some of the turtles that we grew. We sometimes keep some of the more challenging ones as well. We have a system for that. Bouncing around. So we have individuals about this size, which is basically about 3 inches, which is typical for a head start in a year. So what Ms. Haynes over at Central Regional High School and their environmental club has done, and what Michael Howell over at Rumston Fairhaven High School has done, is they really have a knack for raising these very well, feeding them multiple times a day, making sure their temperatures, are comfortable temperatures and not cooler temperatures sometimes that you'll find in the school building. And the other thing is to make sure they have proper light. They have basking areas to kind of come up on if they need to kind of dry out and warm up, because these turtles are ectotherms, or sometimes they call them cold-blooded, which means that their body temperature is regulated, by outside sources. So if you're keeping them colder, it's going to kind of reduce their metabolism. They're not going to want to feed more, and that could be an issue with processing food. So the key is to make sure that they stay warm. Now, you don't want to warm them up too much, because if you warm them up too much, you'll have more chance for growth and other things kind of in the tank. We can't really assess right now to say, oh, they're containing some endoparasites. Maybe they are, containing bacteria. We don't know that. So if you keep them too warm, there's a good chance that these other things can develop. Or if you change temperatures too quickly, they could actually develop some respiratory issues, which could be a big problem. Because once it's in a tank system and these are raised together, it'll spread, just like you have any other type of a disease that could spread. So you got to be very careful with these. So our goal with this project is to release, in terms of the conservation, we feel that the population that we're working with, even at North Sedge Island, is in decline. And we're assessing populations based upon populations of females that are coming up on the island. In the past, we've assessed males and adults, but we still, focus on the females because we have an active nesting project that takes place there. We work with Fish and Wildlife, thanks to Karen Byrne, who coordinates the Sedge Island Natural Resource Center that's out there. Her interns are helping out this year, monitoring terrapins coming up. We've recently recaptured a female that we've been tracking on that island since the mid-2000s. She's been coming up every single year. We were so confident that we ended up putting a data logger on her last year, that we can kind of put her through a year that we can kind of record everything she's been through. We can look at, what depth she's at, what water temperature she experienced. We have it on a certain cycle that it records every day. And we were fortunate enough just this past weekend, thanks to May, that's working out there to recover her, and we were able to upload that data from that data logger. So we're really trying to learn about that population and what happens. These females that produce, these eggs and eventually these hatchlings, they go a longer distance than the males. So they're coming from a certain area within that conservation zone, but we're trying to figure out to the extent at which they come. Do they all come from the same general area, or they kind of meeting there, or we call it an aggregation area. So we've been doing work in that zone for the past, like I said, 18 years now. Our other zone down in Cedar Run, we've recently been marking and recapturing individuals, and we have a pretty decent number now that we're looking at the recapture rates. How many of the marked individuals do we recapture? So this marking is very important for us because we don't want to just guess and say, oh, I think this is a turtle that we released, or was this a Head Start turtle versus natural? So we have a different code each year that's unique to what it was. Was it a wild release? In other words, hatched out of the nest, we recovered it as a hatchling, we put the code in even when it was small, and did we find it again in the future, or was it a Head Start? And we're trying to see if there's kind of a difference in those numbers overall. Are we catching more Head Starts that were marked versus are we catching more of our wild kind of initially marked and just released kind of hatchlings. So they're not Head Starts, it would just be regular hatchlings. So please enjoy tomorrow. We will record the release. Right now, assessing what we have here, we have 20 of our individuals being released, along with 30 individuals that we've raised in conjunction with St. Joseph's University to answer questions about terrapin diet. If we enhance their diets a certain way, will that help those terrapins to grow more? So if we were to run a Head Start program, what would we recommend in terms of feeding the terrapins to make sure that they're on a projected growth? We really feel that a greater growth gives them a greater chance because there's less predators that can go after them. Some predators on hatchlings are gulls, like the blackback gulls, the herring gulls, laughing gulls, so we call those seagulls in general. We have a couple people always joke and call them, they find them in the bay, so they call them bagels. So those are a number of predators. Crows will go after the eggs. I haven't really observed the crow going after hatchlings, but I have seen raccoon go after hatchlings. Fox will just go after anything. We have red fox on Island Beach State Park. Once in a while, one will make its way out to North Sedge Island, and we kind of get devastated because they dig up nests and devour all the eggs, or they'll go after hatchlings. And there's other, smaller predators that are out there too that eat the eggs. We get these things called mink out there. They go after eggs. I haven't seen mink, go after a hatchling, but I also have seen river otter try to go after some of our traps where we have adults. Also, osprey can take them, not adult terrapins. Adult females get to a pretty decent size, maybe 8, 9, 10 inches shell size. So it's more difficult for them. But males don't grow as big. Males, basically, if you find turtle maybe a little bit bigger than this, that would be male. Maybe a couple inches bigger than this would be an adult male. And they can be predated on by raptors like osprey. So there's a lot of obstacles that these hatchlings have to go through. And then when they're small and they get into marsh creeks, there's also crabs that are in there too. There's blue crabs that can predate upon them. So it is a tough obstacle. So the bigger they are, the less chance that you're going to have predators that are going to be able to go after them or be successful against them. So that's one of the reasons why we like the Head Start. And the other reason, once again, is stewardship. We have some great schools that we work with. I mentioned some at the introduction. The students have been working with us on some lawn signs to make people aware of terrapins in certain areas. We want to try to expand that a little bit more so that we can get a little bit more community involvement. And we're hoping that we're able to continue this program. It really just depends on the terrapins coming up to nest, how many come up to nest on our island, and how late they come up to nest. It's usually the late nesters that produce our Head Start school terrapins. So once again, as I just said before, we have our release tomorrow, and we will be recording that and we'll be playing that back. We hope everybody has a great day today, and our friends will be back in their habitats at or within the North Sedge Island, but the Sedge Island Marine Conservation Zone, one of the protected areas that we have in Southern Southern Island Beach State Park. They'll be there tomorrow. So stay well, everybody.